countdown. What's going on, Paul? It's good to have you on the channel.
Hey, how's it going? Great to be here, Dorian. As always, pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like it's having a little bit of a hard time buffering right now. I'm gonna give it some time to see. I don't know if that's just coming on my end.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about Riverside, what it does, it records the video locally, and then after we're done, like if you wait like a minute, 2 minutes, you'll basically upload my local files to yours. So at the end of the day, you'll just have all that perfect video.
Nice.
So yeah, that's the cool part about it.
Well, I'm glad you know about Riverside because I obviously am new to it. But with that, let's start with an introduction and tell everyone who you are and what you do and yeah, we'll take it from there.
My name is Paul. I work as a developer advocate right now. I've been in the tech industry about 5 years. I started as a self-taught developer. Prior to that, I used to run and operate a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mixed martial arts school. And due to injuries, due to a bunch of other struggles I had in life, I decided, let me switch careers. So around like 35, 36, I started learning to code. And around like when I was 38, I already started doing some like PHP development for some small marketing companies local to me. So I was working as a contractor. So I don't count that as the like experience, but I got my real dev job as a React developer at the age of 39. And, the rest, as they say, is history. And I started a YouTube channel because I would fall into these videos on YouTube, which tell you could become a developer in 6 months and make like $3 billion, drive whatever Lamborghini. And all of that stuff is BS. It literally is going to take you as long as it will take you. For me, in my journey, it was hard. It took me almost 4 years to get a job. And I'm sure some others could do it quicker or faster. But I think instead of focusing on the time or how quickly it's going to take you, just focus on doing the work. And when you're ready, you're going to get hired.
For sure. That was a great introduction. It's funny, I was going to actually follow up with asking you, how you got into development and how did you learn to code. So if you want to like go a little deeper into that now that we know who you are, you're self-taught and it took you 4 years. How was that journey for those that don't know?
It was hard. I made a lot of mistakes. I fell hard into tutorial hell. I have 2 Udemy accounts. I looked at both of them. One has 275 courses and the other one has like almost the same amount. And so if you say I spent $12 on each like course, that's a lot of money. And I probably completed maybe 10, maybe at most. Probably like 6 completed. So the mistake I made is trying to learn everything at once. And I realized that I needed to actually find a focus. So back then, React was very popular. It's still popular now. So I just decided, let me go the front end route. And that's what I'm going to focus on. And I did that for a while. I built some projects, some portfolios, started interviewing. We could talk more about how I feel is the best way to get a job, but it is networking, not sending out cold resumes, if someone is wondering. And then I got my first job. In terms of like learning to code, when I was younger, my parents, always would put me to summer school because I never did well in like normal school. And so when I was 11 years old, I took a programming course and it was building things on old school Apple IIe computers. I just fell in love with it. But that's where it ended. Like after that, I just didn't look at coding until I was like in my mid 30s, where I was just like, let me actually pursue this. And the reason, this is actually interesting story, how I kind of decided that I love coding is when you're running your own business, you need to have a business website. You need to have a way to capture leads in your sales funnel so you could like sell memberships. And I realized I loved spending time messing with the WordPress website. And I started by doing like the little things. And then I was like, oh, I wonder what the code looks like underneath this. And so I started learning PHP and all this other great stuff. And then I found out that I would spend more time just messing around with the website than getting clients for my own business. And I was like, you know what? Maybe this is like a good path to me. And due to injuries, I had a knee surgery, I had other minor injuries. I realized that if I continue my trajectory, I'm not going to make it in the industry that I was in. Like I'll be too banged up. And so I decided to make this transition and I'm happy that I did. And I started by trying this idea of freelancing because everybody says freelancing is easy. It's not. Whoever told you freelancing is easy is just an idiot. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say that out loud there, because not only do you need to know the skill that delivers the work, you actually need to know like a little bit about sales, a little bit of marketing, like how do you structure the payment? How do you actually get your clients to pay you? So it's a lot of work. And so I literally wanted to set up my own little company where I built WordPress themes for people and businesses. And while doing that, I continued my learning journey. And basically what happened, I ended up, because I was still applying, I was still trying to find opportunity, I ended up like landing a job as a developer before building a successful like freelancing business. And so I just stuck with that route. I worked as a React and a C# developer for the first year and a half. After that, I switched to a finance company where I helped them build out a new product with React as the front end. And then now I work as a developer advocate at a company called Strappy, which is amazing. If you never heard of it, it's a company that builds an amazing headless CMS. So if you want to power your website, if you're like a front end developer and you're not really good at back end, Strappy is like the best way to get started.
It's funny. I have a lot of questions for you about Strappy too, and DevRel as well. And I guess we can like move right into that if you'd like. I did have a couple of things. Like I noticed you mentioned like you started off with PHP, and it's funny because I'm actually learning Laravel right now. Yeah, no, and I'm diving into Laravel for it's like the first time I touched PHP code and I don't know how long. Like you mentioned, I think everybody touches PHP at some point when they're first starting out, just because you always hear like, oh, PHP is like the language that the internet is built off of, and you hear like Facebook is used PHP and WordPress uses PHP. So at some point in time, I think everybody kind of at least looks at it or tries to build something with it. And it's funny to like come back to it, even though my time with it was really short. And now seeing that, you know, the joke of all the PHP developers drive Lambos and stuff. And that's pretty funny. It's probably because, you know, you got to annotate all your variables with the dollar signs. It's just made of money. But yeah, how do you obviously I see like the common thing that you stuck with in your learning was kind of React, right? Because you said you started PHP, but then you went like trying to freelance, and then you ended up doing like C# and React as your first job, and then like React as your second job. And now I know that you work at Strappy as a DevRel, but I know that a lot of the work and things that you do even on your YouTube channel are mostly around React or React frameworks. And I know that React is like a common thing that we, myself included, usually like recommend for people to learn. It's kind of like the progression is like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then go learn React. And then that leads usually into like learn a backend language or start working with a React framework. And something that I've noticed about you that I actually like give you a lot of props, because you're always like building stuff and you're always like streaming on your channel and using a lot of like the latest frameworks, and like a lot of the stuff that you do on that channel, there's like a lot of learning projects, and it seems like you're always interested in like learning the new things. And as someone who is kind of new to like the front end framework world, especially with React, tell me a little bit about like what are your favorite React frameworks, and like why do you recommend React? And if you were to talk to like a brand new learning to code self-taught programmer person, what would you tell them about like learning React and whether or not it's like the right way to go?
Yeah, so there's a lot of hip developers, and I nothing wrong with being hip and cool, and you want to use like the trending, like whatever. But then there's the business world, and then majority of companies they play it safe. So if you learn React, you're definitely going to have a place for you in the workforce. And so that like to me, like it doesn't have to be like bleeding edge; it just has to be popular. That is used in like majority of companies. And so for me, like people make fun of PHP, but there are jobs for PHP developers. You know, ASP.NET, very popular in like enterprise level stuff, and then you know React, and now like you have Next.js. You know, React was built by Facebook. Vercel is a huge company; it's not going anywhere. And now there's another React framework called Remix, which is actually my favorite framework, although Next.js is pretty good. It's not going anywhere, and Remix is sponsored or owned by Shopify, another huge company. So there's going to be work. And so to me, as someone who started learning development late in my life, I didn't want to play games and take chances on technologies. I wanted to learn something that if I have the skill, can I get work? And for me, that's been my barometer. And so whenever I learn a skill, I try to think two ways, because a lot of times I feel like I'm either going to get hired or I won't. And if I don't get hired, where's my plan B? So in my fantasy world, I'm like, I'm going to build a successful SaaS company or SaaS product or whatever. And so to me, learning technologies that help me fulfill that goal, like, oh, I'm either going to get a job because I have employable skill, or I have the skill to build my own product. And so whoever's starting out, and some people still will like argue on Twitter, and not majority of the world lives on Twitter. It's a small percentage, so take your advice from Twitter as you will. But you're still safe learning React and JavaScript and Node.js, but really it depends like what you want to do. And I still feel breaking into the industry as a front-end developer, although now there's like, you still need to know some back-end stuff, is still the way to go. And if you're just starting out, as much, I love Remix. I think Remix is amazing, but if you're learning, the route I would take, learn like React and then jump on Next.js. And then once you have like a skill that you feel competent, you could build some projects, build your portfolio that you could present at interviews. Once you get hired, then you can start learning other technologies. But for me, it's all about being very narrowed and focused.
No, I think that's great information. It's funny that you mentioned like the Node thing, and even I've done it, and I know a lot of people recommend it, and I'm starting to feel a little differently about it. And I actually have it written down as like a video idea about recommending like the MERN stack. And for anyone who's new or not familiar, MERN is Mongo, Express, React, and Node, because many people will tell you like go learn Node since it's JavaScript, and after you've learned HTML, CSS, vanilla JavaScript, and some React, then going into like the back end with the same language is, easier to learn as a newcomer. And then there's a lot of people that will argue, well, not that many companies use Node. You're kind of telling everyone to learn the same thing. Boot camps do it too, where it's like you learn almost like a framework with Express and Node that isn't widely used. But I think the idea behind it is to just stick with the same language so that you don't send the beginner off to go learn Java or learn C#, because then you start, it's very confusing for someone who's just starting out. And you mentioned that now going from React to Next.js, and I've actually been recommending that to some of the people that I've had like coaching calls with. And I'm starting to feel a little different about recommending Node, more because it's easier if you know React to go into Next than if you know, it sounds weird, but then if you know JavaScript to go into Node and Express, because from that point, if you're just an absolute beginner, you're kind of starting off with like doing little DOM modifications and changing things on the screen with JavaScript, and then you get thrown into like this big framework, and now you have to learn about HTTP requests, and you have to learn about how the whole CRUD functionality works within a big giant framework like Express and Node with that combination. But when you go into like Next with the simplicity of like the page routers and the folder structure routing and things, it feels easier, and it feels way more like, oh, if I know React, that's a lot easier. Where if I just know a little bit of JavaScript and I go into a Node code base, it's going to be almost overwhelming. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of like how I'm starting to feel about sending a beginner down a path of learning. I would say like go learn Next after you have some React.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. That makes like total sense. I think Next.js will allow you to build full stack applications. I am a little bit lazy, so I have some thoughts about it. Also, like the idea of both Remix and Next, they're full stack frameworks. You coupling your front end and your back end together. I have like my thoughts on it, but to your point, going into Next.js makes sense. And what you learn with Next.js, eventually when you want to go down and learn more about Node, you're still able to. Just one quick point about like JavaScript and Node in general. Before working at Strapi, I worked at a company where they had a business idea, and they were trying to figure out, do we build something in Python? Do we build something with Node.js or React? And I literally said, well, you already have me. I'm a React developer. I could do the work. Plus, if you need to hire more developers, it's much easier to find JavaScript developers. And to the CEO of the company, he's like, oh, that makes total sense. Like, we want to make it easy, accessible for other developers to come in, jump on our product, and not have to worry about hiring or looking for the developers. And that's exactly what happened. I started the project, and before I left, they hired like 3 new developers that were JavaScript Node, which was really good. My coming back to Next.js. So when I use Next.js, when I use Remix, even though it's a full stack framework, I only use it as a front end. And because I'm lazy, and people say now, like they say stuff, you're a Strapi simp because you work at Strapi. What people don't understand is I built application with Strapi from day one. I learned the Strapi ecosystem. I always talk about Strapi. And that's why I was qualified to work at Strapi when I applied there. It's not like the cart before the horse or whatever. But the reason why I started with Strapi when I was starting out is because I always think it's like, I don't think about I want to be developer, but I also want to develop the skill where I build an end product for a client. Because when I look at my employer, I look at them as my client. They're just a client that's paying a big paycheck for me because I work for them. But the end goal is I want to have the skill and the ability to deliver that end product. And for me, when I was starting out, Strapi made sense because it basically takes all that, because it's based on Node. We don't use Express, we use Koa, but it was made by the same folks that made Express. And it's such a small library, it's like very easy to learn. And if you know Node, you kind of know Koa. But the reason why I liked it is because I was able to get started right, like with Strapi out of the box, and focus on my front end, and not really try to think about those complex things that you identify. And then what Strapi allows you to do as you got better, you could actually customize it, and you could create like controllers and routers and add middleware and policies. And the reason why I liked the fact that I was able to do that in Strapi and not just in Next.js is because there's going to be a new framework every weekend. And the worry that I saw is if I combine my front end with Next.js and my back end in Next.js, and now I have to refactor, maybe now someone says we need to use Vue.js for whatever reason it is, now I have to rebuild that whole application. If I decouple my front end from my back end, and I'm not saying use Strapi, you could build it yourself with Node, you could use another headless CMS, or literally separate your front end from your API, then it makes it easier. So now it's like, I don't like my Next.js application. I want to do whatever, like I want to use Astro. All right, I just need to point my Astro app to my Strapi backend API, or it could be whatever framework you want. So I'm a big proponent of not using, even though it's like a full stack framework of Next.js and Remix, I never use them as they're intended to do. I use it just as the front end, just because I want to have that flexibility. But with that being said, just at another point, and I might be biased, so I've been really loving Remix, and Remix, it's up and coming. I think the things that Remix did in React, Vercel, Next.js, that they copied. I don't know if they did. I'm just saying I had a really easy time seeing all the changes in Next, like 13 and 14, from people who got used to Next 12, who never saw Remix, because Remix, the things that they did first, I was like, oh, you could kind of do that in Next.js now. I'm not saying that they copied, and Next.js being such a evil, such a Vercel being such a, they're not evil. What am I saying? I was just going to get clipped. But Vercel, they're a big company, and they're like, if you take what happened to Gatsby and Next.js, Gatsby did a thing well, and Vercel's like, oh, we have all this money, we could do that same feature in Next, and now nobody knows what Gatsby is anymore. And so for me, I think if you're a new developer, and learn Next.js, but the other part of me who doesn't like, one framework to rule the world, I'm like, okay, let me learn Remix as well. But yeah, no, good. I know I rambled on, but that's a good advice right there.
No, it's great information, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm kind of going through a lot of those Next.js first time working in serverless framework kind of blues, I guess. I kind of talked about it a little bit in the video, but I didn't go too deep into the specifics of like my pain points with Next and stuff like that, because I come from a traditional like back end, front end, full stack application. I mostly worked with Java and Spring Boot, and going into doing everything in React and then trying to almost make that work for full stack, because it's technically full stack like you said, but it's almost like you're dealing with serverless stuff. You kind of like need a service for everything, because it's it's full stack, but it's not at the same time, right? Like you can do it, but it almost feels like you're forcing square pegs into round holes or whatever in some of the things. And that's kind of what I've been experiencing with it, which has led me into like looking for other alternatives like Laravel or something like that. That's a more traditional, like full stack, and you have your database, you have your back end, you have your front end. Sure, it's server side HTML with the live wire and whatnot with Laravel, but it's more traditional. And I know that in the last few years there has been a big push to serverless. And you mentioned Gatsby, and what Paul was talking about was kind of like the static site generation that Next.js kind of. I don't necessarily know if they took it from Gatsby, but that's what Gatsby did, and they did that one thing good. Yeah, and they did it very well, and there was a lot of hype back when Gatsby came out, and that's when you first started hearing the term Jamstack, and that's kind of, I want to say it's like one of the forefathers of serverless, because it kind of like led some of that stuff, or led what then became frameworks like Next.js and Remix. And now Gatsby, you don't really hear much about it. Funny that my personal portfolio for my personal site, that's like the one I use to apply for jobs, is still under Gatsby, because that's what I built it on way back then. And it was around the same time where all the hype was around GraphQL too. But I do have mixed feelings about Next.js, and I could see how much better and more pleasant it would be if you used it more for the front end side. Because there's a lot of good things that it has, a little bit more than just React out of the box. But I do see a lot of the pain points when you start doing a lot of like back end heavy stuff on it. And that was like my own personal experience with it too. It's funny because on my project, I started with Strappy. And it was a mistake I made. Not that Strappy's not good. I was kind of choosing the wrong tool for the job, because I realized that while needing a headless CMS was a very small part of what I was trying to do, because there was going to be like a blog feature, and my thoughts were like, oh, my wife can go in and write some blog posts and like do them in the CMS for that, and then I can just have a nice user experience for her. But then what I started finding that I struggled with Strappy was that I never really worked in Node. So there was a bit of a learning curve of learning like how Node works. Yeah. And when I really started getting into the weeds of like relations in Strappy and like setting up a lot of that heavier backend controllers and stuff like that, it started feeling like, for me personally, like Supabase was a little bit easier to transition into, because they had a lot of like the client side JavaScript library from Supabase that it provides. It kind of handles a lot of that stuff, and it played a little bit better with Next.js for the things I needed it for. I thought it was great, honestly, when I was using Strappy at the beginning, and like the first couple things that I implemented were the blog functionality. I was like, this is awesome, and I think it's very robust, and you can use it for a lot of stuff, but it just wasn't the tool for me. But that goes back to just like beginner building my own stuff and running into problems that were more like personal problems, not technical problems. It was more personal problems that led to technical problems because of my lack of understanding how certain things worked and what I needed them to do. I ended up using the wrong tool for the job and had to like rewrite some stuff. But I don't know. I kind of went off on a weird tangent there.
It's a good tangent to go on, by the way, actually too, because like the best thing that you could use is the thing that you're good at that allows you to keep momentum to build a thing for your client. And so like it's a very good point, because a lot of times people jump from framework to framework thinking that there's like the grass is greener on the other side, and at the end of the day is how competent are you in this particular tech stack that will allow you to achieve the goal that your customer or your client set for you. And so that's definitely like a good point, and we all have to remind ourselves. Speaking a little bit like more on Next.js, I think like it's funny how you mentioned like there's certain complexities when you try to do something else, and then you mentioned about like Strappy, like when you went down this deeper like route, and it's like, okay, you found out it wasn't quite what you were looking for. And it's almost like there is no perfect framework. And one interesting thing that I found myself doing, and I was actually going to say, like, so I use Next.js for certain projects, and I only use the features that make sense for me. And another interesting thing, for instance, like in my personal website that I'm building right now with Remix and Strappy, I'm using Strappy for everything. But because I work for Strappy and because like I live that whole Strappy life, to me that just like makes sense. But here's the funny thing: I talked to a bunch of different companies that have these massive products, and they're using Strappy, but they're only using it for content delivery. So they literally will just use it for the blog posts, and something else could be handled with something else. And I thought, I was like, hey, you don't need to use Strappy for everything. It could actually be like a little microservice that you're using just to get your blog post. And what I was going to say with like Strappy, like for instance, if you're going to have a lot of people working at your company, a lot of people need to have an admin like UI where they could manage content. Like Strappy 100% like makes sense. But if that's not the case, like, there's other things and tools that are available.
For sure. And it's so funny because before I got off of Strappy, I was like, well, I could just keep it for the blog post. But since I was building a personal, and essentially it will be hopefully making some money. So it's actually more of a, my own small business community website that I was building. I thought about, well, I'll keep it for the blog post, but then I got into the weeds of like, well, this is going to be an extra expense because I kind of have to host it separately from the other stuff. So it's just like, and it's not a lot of money, but I was just like thinking like, well, do I really need it? And then it goes back to like, I should have planned it out better. Honestly, I really enjoyed working with it. And like now I understand what I would use it for if I needed to use it in the future. And it's a tool that I would have in my tool belt. And I think that it comes back to like my lack of building like side projects and personal projects. And had I done that on, just for a learning experience, it would have been fun to build something with Strappy and understand it better before I tried to use it for something that I was actually going to try to like release as a business. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I want to say that when I was doing a lot of Googling and had like, things that I was trying to learn in Strappy, since it was new to me, I want to go back to like what you mentioned earlier on how like, oh, people are like, oh, he's just a Strappy simp. Dude, do you know how many blog posts or forum replies and videos that you helped me with that were, I think, before you even worked at Strappy? It was just you being like active in the community.
That's so funny.
And every time I saw your little avatar pop up, I was like, damn, Paul is like answering all of my questions. And it's funny because, it just goes to show that you were working with it before you were employed by them. And I think that because of you liking this product and taking the initiative to give back to the community, and obviously like that comes from when like you probably ran into a problem yourself and then you wanted to share it so that other people would know, and it goes into like the making content stuff. But it kind of, I guess what I'm trying to go with that is that how that led into DevRel, because you didn't do DevRel before that, right? This is your first DevRel role.
Strappy is the first role, and a lot of learning on the job, let me tell you.
Which for people who might not know, and I think it's still, DevRel is still something that's kind of new to me as well. I'm more familiar with it now because I know people who do it, but it is something that's it's pretty new, right? Like maybe in the last couple years, and it's one of those things where when things were booming, there was a lot of DevRel, and that, it is one of those positions that tend to kind of, I think I saw Dennis Ivey mention something about like how, like, when businesses start cutting back, DevRel goes first because they feel like it's not as important of a role. But as a developer who had so many questions about stuff, seeing like your posts and seeing how much value you added, like I 100% believe that DevRel is a very important role. And I want to just hear your take on it and tell us a little bit more about like, how you got into it and how you feel about being a developer relations.
Yeah, so for me, I think like DevRel, and developer relations, it is fairly new. And I think a lot of people trying to figure out what it is. And I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter. I do have a Twitter, but I don't follow like other developer like advocates so much. Like I follow a few, but very particular. And I don't follow like that whole Twitter hype, like where people, I don't know, like if you call it like everybody just loves talking about themselves and tech, how their day is going, like what they're doing, and like what kind of cookies they eat in the morning before they get to job. Not saying there's anything wrong with it, but when I went into the DevRel, I was kind of naive and I didn't know what the definition of DevRel was outside of what I thought DevRel was. And I saw this talk, I forgot who it was, who basically said DevRel folks should be like a unicorn. It's very good technical developer, or at least as best as you can be, and also someone who's a great educator who's able to explain those topics. And your goal as a developer advocate or developer relationship, you're the bridge between the community or the people that use your tooling and your engineering team. And your goal is to make your product as easy and as possible to use, get started, make sure you have all the resources. And to me, I feel like that is a very important role, because you're kind of responsible for new folks either trying out the product or people being successful at working with the product. And I know that there's a lot of DevRels that got laid off, and I think it just depends on the company, how many people they had working, because DevRel is technically part of marketing, and sometimes, if the company is laying people off, like they have to make decisions. But I feel like if you're a very technical person, you have a good relationship with the developers, you are talking to the community, you are producing that content, you are giving feedback, you are a valuable person of the team. And so if you provide the value that you provide based on what I said, you're probably not going to be the first one on the cutting block. I'm not saying that I'm not going to get laid off at some point, or like no one's immune from layoffs. It's just the reality. If a company, if that's how it's meant to be, that's how it's going to happen. But I think what happened, there was a lot of people in DevRel who may have not been that technical aspect of it, and more on the marketing, going to, giving talks, which is a really important thing to do. But they were more the face. But I think you also need to have like the technical abilities and the skills that allow you to work with other developers. And I talked to one of my friends here in Texas. He used to work for, my God, I did wrestling today. I must have been slammed on my head because I can't remember anything. Good Lord. Docker. He used to work for Docker, and he was their like senior developer advocate manager. And I kind of talking to him because I tried to figure out like, am I like what is it? Like what's the value that developer advocates bring? And one thing he said to me, he's like, look, if you can't talk the technical talk, like if you weren't a developer, and that was his opinion. I'm not going to say his name either because like I'm not going to whatever. But he said, and this is something that I asked him. I said, if I'm not technical and I'm trying to talk to developers, are they going to take me serious? The answer is no, they're not. Like the developers, they will they'll be able to tell. And so if you're, in my mind, looking to be a developer advocate, your goal to be you want to be as technically as possible, like the best, like you want to pursue the idea of being a developer, and being the best one that you can be within your limits and your reach and where you are in like life. But to say that you're not going to be technical, that's just crazy. And the second part of it, you have to be able to talk about the product. You have to create the resources. You also have to be not afraid of taking negative criticism and bringing it back to your team and then trying to figure out the issue. So to me, like, I think when I first started, and I'll circle back to it, I was actually thinking of going back into like straight up developer role. And then the more I worked, I realized there is a huge value for a company if they have a good developer advocate. And I'm not saying like I'm the best or I'm good. I'm striving to be the best that I can, but I want to make sure every day that I do my job, my company sees the value that I bring. So if you're going with that lens, I think there's a big future for good developer advocates out there. And if you think you're just gonna like show up and have your mocha latte and that's it and be just another pretty face, I know I'm pretty, but damn, there's a lot more to it than that. So I'll stop here.
No. It's funny that you mentioned that, and I think that that's why when I first started hearing the term developer relations or developer advocate, I think that was why I was so kind of like confused on like what is this? Because from just looking at it at a glance, it did feel very much like, oh, it's a marketing thing. Like they're the people that try to sell this product to developers, and that's what it felt like at first. And I think that's what it was when things were booming, right before a lot of the layoffs and before a lot of these startups got went through what they went through a couple of years ago or a year ago. God, time flies. But if you know, not too long ago, there was a lot of companies that lost funding, and if you've kept up with the news, you'll know that obviously right now is not like the best time for hiring, and a lot of companies have been laying off. And when I saw a lot of like those things happen and a lot of like those DevRels get cut, I was like, well, I kind of get it, because I wasn't even sure what they did. Like, and I'm a developer, but when you explain like what a developer relation should do, I think that was a perfect explanation of it, because you're like bridging that connection between the product and the devs, and having that technical knowledge. I thought DevRel just went to conferences or wrote blog posts, but it makes perfect sense like what you're saying, because the devs know, right? And obviously the longer you've been a developer and the better of a developer you are, the more you know. And if you've ever been in conversations with developers, like people get super technical and start getting like in the weeds of stuff. And if you're representing a company and you're the advocate for this product, like, yeah, you better know, because you're going to get some senior level guys going to come and ask you, hey, I'm trying to do this thing and I don't understand why it's doing it, and you should know how to explain it to me. And if you don't, then it's like, well, what do you do?
Well, let me just, I'm good. I'm not that good, but I was just gonna say, you also have to be like, you know what? I don't know, but I know where to find the answer. And then you go, I'm not like at that godlike status yet, but that's what I'm working at. But yeah, no, exactly true. And to me, I feel like one thing I'm going to come back to, I know I say sales a lot because I used to work in sales back in the day, and I use it interchangeably when I talk about share the benefits of someone, because I'm trying to sell someone on how cool our product is. I'm not selling it in a sense like, give me money and I'll give you this product. Like Strapi is open source, it's free for anyone to use. But the thing about sales is interesting. Developers don't do sales. You can't sell anything to a developer, right? So that's why being a good developer advocate, you don't sell the product. You literally just engage with the community and you showcase the features and how to use them. And then people make their own decision. Like, is this like right for me? If it's not right for me, they could ask follow-up question. But you basically helping people on a technical level understand what your product does. And I feel like if you do DevRel as a salesperson, that's also going to be like perceived negatively. I know I might say it, but that's not what I mean.
No, and that makes perfect sense. And it's so funny. I laughed when you said that, because developers are, like you sell business, right? And all I could think about is like being a developer, like you don't have to sell a developer on something, because usually if something's good enough, it's got like enough of a reputation from word of mouth, from other devs, from it's adoption and how many people use it, to where like a developer will want to use something just because they've heard so many good things about it, versus like you sell business or you sell management on something, and then the developers usually get angry, because then we're like, oh god damn it, why did they buy this? Now we got to figure out how to use this, and this sucks. And I'm not saying that in any particular tech, but coming from working in the Adobe world and working in AEM for so long, we felt like that a lot, because Adobe is a big sales team, and untechnical, non-technical management who doesn't know any better gets sold very easily on a lot of the promises and wishes that some of these big sales team are able to convince them of. And then the developers are stuck having to figure out how to make it all work. And it's just like, why did you just pay $1 million for this? You could have done it with this free open source thing that does it better. And it's just like, that's why I laughed when you're like, yeah, you're never going to sell a developer. And it's true. You sell them by just having a good product, and then having like a DevRel who can help, right? Help when needed, so that they know that they are in good hands when they start using something new.
And I know I make fun of Vercel sometimes. I think Vercel is a good company. Like, I know I said evil company. Everybody has to have a villain, but they're Lee Robinson, their head of developer advocate. He's amazing, and I actually like follow a lot of stuff like he does because to me, like he's very technical. He's very good at talking and things, and I think like he provides important value. And so I try to find these. Like people that I could look up to and be like, this is what I want to do in our community to make sure that people are having a good experience with our product. And that's why, like, there's no product that's perfect. They all have their things that they struggle with. And the most important part is how's the community and, and can you get the help that you need? And so one of the things we started to doing at Strappy, because sometimes on the forum, like it's hard to answer all the questions, hard to, talk to everybody, and sometimes people want the answer now, and it's like, listen, it's so much stuff. And so what we do is like Monday through Friday, do a little plug, 12:30 p.m. CST time. If you want to talk to me, come to Strappy Discord and hang out. But we basically decided it's like, let's put a time like during the week where you don't have an excuse to say, hey, I had this question, but I couldn't ask it, because you could literally stop by the Strappy open office hours and talk to us. And sometimes it's like, hey, we love the product. This is really good. And sometimes it's like, hey, you guys all suck and blah, blah. But listen, it comes with the territory. But the most important part is to have an open community where you hear and listen to everybody and try to do your best thing that's possible.
100%, because it's like if you only listen to the positive feedback, then you're never going to improve in the areas that you're weak. And like everybody's got some things that they can improve on. It every company does, every business, every product. So it's good to take it all in, and it's awesome to offer like a feedback time to try to get everyone to be able to address their questions and hopefully provide them with answers. It's funny you mentioned Lee Robinson and Next.js and Vercel. I think Lee Robinson is awesome. I see him on Reddit, and I see him in the Next.js subreddit all the time. Like the dude's just answering questions left and right. I will say that one time when I first got into Next.js, I had a question and I asked it, and it was version 14, and he kind of like just linked the tutorial, and he linked the lesson in it, and I was like, this doesn't answer my question. And like he's super nice, because I thought it was like an automated response or an AI generated response by him, or a bot response. And I was like, oh well, thanks for the thorough question. And he came back and he kind of like answered my question better, and I felt like I was kind of snarky and being like, oh, thanks a lot for the bot.
It's funny you say that, because I keep for like I mean, he's up there, right? And I would imagine like he gets thousands of people that he talks to, because I had one interaction with him, because I think Next.js is an awesome framework. And I think like if you're learning React and you're going to build stuff, like Next.js is not a bad option. I think Remix is also a good option. People like expect me to choose sides. I'm like, look, I like Remix, I like Next.js. There's nothing you could do. But with that being said, I remember I made a post on Twitter where I said I built the same thing in Remix and it was just much easier. And he got back to me, and he literally just wanted me to tell him what was the reason. And I kind of like took that as the start of a conversation where I was like, hey, no, I also like Next.js. So I tried to show him like all the other things I did with Next. And it's almost like he like didn't even read that part. He's like, no, tell me what things you were able to do in Remix better than Next.js. And I took that as him being like, smug or like whatever. But then I realized like let me put myself in his shoes. He must get so many people talking to him. It's like so many requests. I'm sure like if you're public on any social and you're representing a company, you're going to have people like send you like, talking crap or like whatever. And then you just get so overwhelmed that I was like, he just wants to get to the point so he could tell his team what things they could do better, or is it like a real concern? And like, and then I realized is that he's just got a lot going on, and I might have like in my mind misread it as him being smug, but I think it's what comes with the territory when you're dealing with a lot of people. But with that being said, like what he does and the tutorials he does, like it's amazing. And to me, I could only hope that I'm doing the same thing in like my company, like what he's doing. And this is like kind of like the point that I wanted to do. There's a lot of developer advocates on Twitter, but you want to find the developer advocates that fit that, like that definition that I had. They're the unicorn who are really good developers and really good at communicating to those developers the benefits and also listening. And if you do that part right, I think there is going to be work for you. And just coming back to, like very common, a lot of people like, oh, should we learn to code like in 2024? Devon's taking everybody's jobs. All Devon is going to be doing is taking angel investors money and trying to dupe them into like parting with their. I'm just kidding. I'm like, but the point is, like this whole argument, like AI is going to replace us. This is going to replace us. Like people thought that about Squarespace, right? People thought about like WordPress. There's always going to be technologies. The way could shift. And I was watching Primeagen, amazing. Everybody knows who Primeagen is, but he had an interesting take. He talked about Devin. He gave his view, like, look, it's not going to take your jobs. There's a little small caveat that Primeagen mentions that I will mention at the end, but he did a funny thing. He then went to the website of Devin, and guess what they're doing? They're hiring new developers. It's like, hey, if you created the AI that's so smart, why the hell do you need to hire more developers? So I think AI is going to be just another tool that we use. It's definitely not going anywhere. And I think as developers, we want to learn how to do these tools to create, answers for business problems that people are paying us money for. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think people should worry about if there's going to be a job or not.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like just to touch on like the Lee Robinson thing, I put him up there with like, so I've joked around like, oh, maybe I should be a developer advocate, like completely joking. I don't have a certain technology that I feel like I know that well to advocate for, or to even like do that as a role. And also then I always try to like compare myself to like, all right, if I were to try to do something professionally and like really go for something, like, can I be at this person's level? And when I see people like you who are just like, dude, you're in the forums, you're on YouTube, you're writing blog posts. I see Lee Robinson, he's in Reddit, he's on Twitter, he's doing videos. Like, can I put myself at that level of like commitment to be that good in this thing? And I personally don't. I hate to say it, there's no piece of tech that I'm not passionate about. Like I just want to use the tool, get it, use it what I need it for, and move on. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or maybe I'm the majority and not the minority. I don't know, because I know there's some people that are ultra passionate about certain tools and they dive deep, they contribute to their projects, they do all that stuff, they contribute to the communities. And then most of us just need to use something. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if I could be a developer advocate unless I found something that I actually was like, dude, I love this. I want to use this all the time. I want to tell my friends about it. I think that's when you find something like that makes a better fit for it, rather than just doing it to be a job. Because like, if you told me I had to write blog posts and make YouTube videos on Next.js, I'd be like, nah, bro, it ain't gonna happen. Yeah. I don't like it like that. I will say that the Devin thing, and man, the way that Twitter hypes stuff up sometimes, and the way that these things come and go, and how much noise goes around something and then just disappears. I kind of blame some of the, quote unquote tech influencers that we have. Like, I think Primeagen's awesome. I love his story. I know that he comes from like addiction into success, which I advocate for anyone who's able to do that. And I know that he's a big name, and I see people like Theo, and I see a lot of these like bigger influencers that, it's almost like they add flames to the fire, like they add gas to the fire, and they almost blow things up more just because something's popular. I know how it goes. Like, oh, something's popular, make a video on it. It's going to get views. And then we like hype these things up, and then people come in and they're like, oh, I'm not going to learn how to code. This robot named Devin's going to do all the coding, and there's not going to be any jobs and this and that. And like, it's almost like, I wanted to make a video on Devin, and I stopped myself because I was just like, no, I don't want to play this game, and I hate that we. I'm sure it would have. I'm sure it would have. But it's just like, man, why do we do this? Because all it does is confuse newcomers and scare people away from the industry. And then you have like the CEO of NVIDIA that's like, oh, don't learn how to code. I'm like, bro, does that dude even know how to code? Like, why is he telling people not to be programmers? Because he's going to end up having to hire a lot more programmers. But I don't know. It's just,
So
I hate the hype and a lot of the stuff that goes into the like the social media stuff when something's trendy and
yeah,
scary and can get clicks, you know.
one thing I was gonna say, and I totally agree about like influencers, and I hope I never become that type of influencer. Who knows though? Once I start seeing that money flowing in my YouTube channel, who knows? But the thing is that I was gonna say, like talking about Theo, talking about Primogen, they will use these like they want to catch the hype because that's you got to play the game. If you want to get the views, you got to play the game. But what I like, if you watch their streams, if you listen to their videos, they come from a point of common sense and they'll give you both sides. They'll give you like whatever. So as a developer, you listen to them, you're like, oh, I get it. I see both sides. But then there's the other influencers. They're just doing for the hype. They just want to see the views. They're not really giving you the value. And as a new developer, you can't see through that. And that's like the issue I have, is because I find myself explaining to new developers, no, you still, if you this is what you like, you're going to be able to develop the skill, you're going to be able to get a job, you're going to have a fine like future. But the fact that I have to explain that to somebody like kind of disheartens me a little bit, because I'm like the hype that's not like one-to-one relation to the real world is selling people on this lie. And when, for instance, like the thing that the NVIDIA like CEO was talking about when he's marketing a product, potential product to big organizations and businesses, I'm sure it's going to be expensive. I'm sure like whatever. And it's like when people see that, it's just something that's going to be a story. It's not like if he just said, hey, if you're going to have a tool that's going to help you code faster, no one would be like, oh, whatever. But if he came in like, stop, get your kids out of like CS degree. It doesn't like, cause our product's gonna do it better. It's like that just, oh my God, like it big builds attention. And I feel like it's something that we have to learn to do, is to understand what's market speak and understand what's truth. And, you know, and you could have a little bit of truth in market speak, but people just want to get your attention. And with all this like bots, with all this stuff, you gotta kind of say crazy stuff for people to listen to. But coming back to tech jobs, like you said, like, oh, like thinking like what a developer advocate is, like maybe I'm not going to be able to do it. The cool thing about it is like for instance, like if you are good at tech, you could be a developer advocate. You could be a programmer. You could be a contractor. For instance, you like the use case that you're working for your own like little business idea. You could talk to others about how you did it, lessons learned, and you could be advocate of your own thing. And so a lot of people, when they think about tech, they think about, oh, I just have to be a programmer. There's so many subfields. Like we have like solution engineers that their responsibility for a company has a product, and the client runs into bugs. They like, you know, test the bug, confirm the bug, try to troubleshoot the bug. Is there like something that exists? Is it something that needs to be fixed? So if you're technical, in my mind, you basically have additional language that could help you find new opportunities, which being a programmer is just one small slice of the pie. And that's why I tell people, don't quit learning to code, because if you're technical, you still have opportunity. I'll give you an example. A lot of these technical companies, they have sales team. Maybe you like talking to people more than I do. They're actually, a lot of those folks, they look for technical salespeople. And guess what? They make a lot of money too. Which maybe that's what I should. And I hate selling. So I'm not going to do that. But there's so many opportunities out there.
You know, it's so funny that you mentioned that, and I forgot. I know who said it. I forgot where I heard it, if it was on his podcast or if it was like on the 4 Hour Work Week. But Tim Ferriss talked about when he was like doing sales, and he was saying how he was a salesman, but everyone thought that he was one of the tech people, because his way of selling was just understanding the product so well that when he went to go sell these things, he explained them so well and knew how they worked that everyone thought that he was like a tech and not a salesperson. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's like the first thing that came to my mind, was that that's a really good way, because if you know your product, like you can sell it, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't know how it works and you get asked a question like that, then you kind of are a fish out of water. And you know, it's bad when you're trying to sell something and someone asks you a question. You got to be like, you know what, I don't really know. And it's just like, oh man, that could be a deal breaker for some people depending on how they receive that. But yeah, I don't know, the hype building, and like I always try to give both sides of the coin. And I've talked about AI a couple times, and I had one video where I was just saying like everything about learning how to code is just right now, right? And I think the problem is that usually with those videos, the first half is the let's talk about the clickbaity portion of it. Let's talk about the fear. Let's talk about all the what ifs. And then it's usually like the second half that ends up being the let's be reasonable. This is actually what it is. Don't be so scared about it. This is how I feel, because you kind of have to tell the story and let people know about what's going on. But then what happens is that most people don't get to the back half of it, and most people only see the first half of it. And then it's really hard, because like in that video, I was like, yeah, things are fucked, right? Like we're dealing with layoffs, we're dealing with AI, we're dealing with boot camps that are pumping out people left and right. We're dealing with a lot of stuff that's we haven't probably seen since like either 2008 or 2001 when it comes to like tech and the economy, right? But I still feel that we are in like a perfect time to learn how to code. I'm coaching one guy right now, and he's full-time learning on his own. And like he's doing such a good job doing it, because he asked me, he was like, look, I'm not gonna have a job for a while, my wife's got the bills, how do I learn? And I was like, approach it like a job, spend 8 hours a day, take a lunch break, like learn like that. And he started asking about AI. I was like, use it to help explain some of the things. Like think about the things that you would be Googling, and of course take some of the stuff that it might give you with a grain of salt, but it's great at like 100%. Giving you basic concepts and like explaining things to you that I would have had to go and, you know, read through a bunch of blogs. I would have had to go and read through a bunch of forum posts. I would have had to go to Stack Overflow. I would have had to go to Mozilla. I would have had to go to like all these different resources to find the answer to a question, where now with like AI, you just kind of type it in, and you know, some of the plugins and some of the different type of options that you have actually have access to the internet, which basically all they're doing is answering those same questions that you would have had to go out and look for. And it's a tool. And the way I would tell someone how to use it is the same way I'm using it now to help me build things faster as well. Like I didn't know Next.js, I didn't know Supabase, I didn't know a lot of this serverless stuff, and I didn't even know what like edge functions were, and like these were all new things to me. And all I did was I started chatting with ChatGPT, and it's like my mentor and my rubber ducky, and I just like use it as the tool that is meant to be used, and I accelerate my learning, and I accelerate at the rate that I can build things, and I start to understand concepts and figure things out faster. And as a developer who's experienced, who's used it and is seeing like how you can use it and how it can make you better, like I think it's great. Like I wish I was learning how to code right now, because I feel like it was so much harder when I learned how to code 7 years ago, because now there's so many new tools and resources and even more channels, because I think there's a lot more people talking about it. There's a lot more options, but at that same, the other side of that coin is that, there's a lot more options. So it's more confusing, and it's hard to like weed through the trash and figure out what's good and what provides value, or who's just trying to sell you something. But still, I would say more information is better than less information. And like take it back to like 30 years ago when people had to learn from books. Can you imagine like learning how to code from only a book?
That is insane. I can't even. I have a bunch of programming books I bought that I haven't looked at like 4 or 5 years, because that's such an arcane way for me to like look at knowledge, because I would just have a conversation with ChatGPT. So the caveat that I want to say, like a lot of people say, is AI going to take jobs? And I think you should be in any field, regardless if you're a plumber, electrician, developer, nurse, doctor, whatever, you should strive to be the best that you could be at it. So I think like mediocre developers are going to lose their job. I had like a similar conversation with a designer. I'm like, hey, aren't you afraid that AI is going to replace your designs? And he's like, if I was a crappy designer, yeah, I would be afraid. But he's like, I'm not worried, because there's specific use cases where, there's a lot more work than just like in creating design than, just asking chat, Midjourney or whatever. And so I think that's what we have to understand. We have to get out of this idea. I think when people watch these hype videos learning to code, they think of like, how quickly can I get to a 6-figure income? It's like watching drop shipping videos. How quickly could I drop ship and make $10,000? So it's like, how quickly can I get rich? Everybody's like looking at the quick and easy. I'm not saying that's what they're thinking about like consciously, but subconsciously it's like you try to find a quick fix. And the secret is whatever field endeavor you decide to go into, you try to become the best that you could be at it, so you're never like the top 20% that is going to lose their jobs to AI. You want to be like part of the upper percent, and that just comes with dedication and working. And that's why I tell people, don't focus on like how soon like you could get your job, even though we all ask that question. It's just focus on becoming the best that you could be at that particular skill, and the job will come. That's just the facts.
No, I agree. I agree. And, even to add, because you said like the mediocre developers, and I'm one of those people who believes that the majority of people are somewhere in the middle. Like you might think that everyone's a 10x
Yeah.
developer, especially if you're on social media, because there's a lot of them that feel that way, and you see like these people that really stand out because they work at either really big companies or they've been doing it for 20 years and they're teachers and educators, and they have a big resume and a lot of experience, and like a lot of that comes with time. But like as someone who's worked at different companies in all kind of private sector, public sector, like I've kind of been all over. I've contracted, I've worked for marketing teams as a developer, and I've worked for, the tech team for the state where we built out applications that served the public. And like I know that there's a wide range of devs, and everybody's kind of in the middle. Like some
Yeah.
people, like most people know like a few things really well, and most people know a lot of stuff okay, right? And like the longer you do it, the better you get. But I do think that there's a lot of people who get comfortable and don't want to learn anymore after they've been somewhere for a while, and kind of go on autopilot, easy mode. And I don't know when AI might replace those people, if it ever will. But like I think of it as like if I onboarded a junior dev right now, you know how it is to deal with a junior developer in a new code base. They ask a lot of questions, and this is all good things, right? Like they're lost most of the time. They don't really know what they're doing, and they usually need a lot of hand holding. Like I think of like if I had to onboard a junior dev and they allowed me to use ChatGPT, the old thing used to be like, before you ask me a question, go Google it. Now I would just be like, before you ask me a question, go ask Chat GPT, and then run it by me, and I'll tell you whether or not like that's the right approach. And again, it goes back into using that tool. And eventually, if you get enough good positive feedback and you start learning, you'll become a better developer. And I think that the mediocre developers are just the ones that end up not wanting to learn anymore. And I think that those people were going to get replaced as soon as they could anyways. And
Yeah.
it would, if it's not going to be by AI, it would be by cheaper devs or outsourced devs or contractors or things like that, because it happens, right? When companies start cutting back, usually the people that aren't contributing are the ones that are looked at the most for the chopping block, right? And it doesn't matter the tech that's on its way that could replace those people. Like companies are looking to replace those mediocre people regardless of
Yeah.
what they can replace them with. If it can save them money, that's all big companies care about. I don't know, I got into a big
No, it's good. I
anti-corporate
think that one, like, I think it's
spiel there.
important to like clarify mediocre. Like the mediocre means somebody, in my mind, is somebody who is never really wanted to do their best to achieve anything, but always looked at trying to find the easy path to get like a quick payout and then just coast. And majority of developers that are out there, they're not that person. And so by saying that, it's like you don't have to worry because you're going to have something for you to do. And when you look at layoffs, like a lot of times when people lay people off, it's not because like, oh, the person is not qualified for the job or like what have you. It's because the leadership of the company made decisions where they thought they're going to make a certain amount of money and then they didn't. And now to make the report look really nice, they need to cut their expenses. And the fastest way to do that is just by let those people go. Here's one thing that a lot of people don't talk about. A lot of the people that got laid off, it's not like they're like still laid off. I'm not saying it's easy to get a job, but they're still very hireable. And a lot of them did find jobs. And I actually know my friend who works at a big company. They had a huge layoff, and then 3 months later, they rehired a bunch more people. It's like a cycle. It's a web and flow. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens, and nobody is immune. But that is with every job. You could be a teacher, you could get laid off. You could be a bus driver, you could get laid off. You could be, if you're self-employed and you could find customers, maybe you're immune to that. You know what I mean? But outside of that, that's not a struggle that in tech. It's just you listen to Twitter, everybody's like, oh my God, like, and every time it's like Facebook, Google, Nvidia. It's all these huge companies, and I'm like, I don't work for any of those companies. It's like, and so they're not the only tech companies. One of my friends, he used to work. We have this grocery store called HEB. I didn't even know they had a tech department, but apparently here in Texas, they have like a pretty nice tech spot and location. I go to a meetup there. It's amazing. And my friend's like, yeah, HEB never laid off. You know why? Because everybody needs food, good times, bad times. And so, they were going strong. And like, it's like, I would have never thought about getting a tech job as a developer at a grocery store chain, but you get paid the same. Who cares? It's like, yeah,
no, you're 100% right. And I think we always look at like the bigger companies, and like I've been looking at a little bit of like what's going on in the economy or job economy a bit, and you're seeing like a lot of companies that laid off, and I've mentioned this before, mostly because they did a lot of hiring during COVID and everybody going remote, and they had like, they were getting money to to stay. They were getting a lot of money from breaks that the government and stuff was giving, so that they hired more. And then now we're kind of seeing a correction in that. And the thing is just like you mentioned, like people are getting laid off, but then these companies are rehiring. And something else that I saw that's happening, or at least word on the street, is that a lot of them are rehiring contract roles, because what they're doing is they're getting rid of full-time employees, because full-time employees are expensive. You got to pay them benefits. You got to pay all kinds of shit when it comes to their total compensation versus a contractor. You pay them what they make, and that's it. You don't have to worry about any other benefits. And as someone who worked in like a big company before, I remember that they kind of went through a round of layoffs, and they hired, and they were hiring contractors. And it's weird how companies work, because sometimes it's department based, and they'll start pulling money from other budgets, and they'll start like the contractor budget wasn't the same budget as like our budget from our department. It came from like a different department that we didn't even deal with, but we took their money for our like employee budget. And it's so strange to me. And I was just like, aren't we all just the same company? And at the end of the day, it's what you said. It's for reports to make the numbers look better for the shareholders. And it's so funny when you get into it and you see how like these big corporations work, and how a lot of that stuff, and even smaller companies, at the end of the day, it really is all the same, just at bigger scale. But when you see that, it like, for me, it personally left like a bad taste in my mouth, and that's why I'm very much like a Josh Fluke when it comes to like, I don't care about companies, because they don't care about me at the end of the day. And like, it's a mutual agreement. You are paying me so that I can do this for you, and that's it. We ain't family. We're not friends. I'm not answering my phone on the weekend for you. Like, and I think that's what we are now realizing with a lot of people that had dream jobs, and they're kind of like left high and dry because they got laid off, and it sucks. It's shitty, but I still think, I'll tell everybody, like, I would still learn how to code today. If I was in the same exact position, I wouldn't do it the same way, because now I know better, but I would still do it 100% each time, every time.
Yeah, and now that we have like ChatGPT, like, I think you could accelerate your learning, that you could continue to get better and get to that higher level of a developer like fairly quickly, just because you have all these helpful tools around. So I think anybody that's interested, definitely do it. I don't regret, even now, like if I, being where I am now, let's say I didn't switch to development, I still would say like, let me go ahead and do it. Because at the end of the day, I look at it like, if you don't do this, like, what else are you going to do? Like, what's the other options? Oh, I'm going to do like, here's like the funny thing for me. This is funny. I had somebody, because I used to work construction a long time ago, and it's not easy work, and you actually have to have a skill, and there's a lot that goes into it. And the dude goes to me, he's like, dude, AI is going to take all the jobs that I'm not going to learn development. I'm just going to go into plumbing. I'm like, you know what? Good for you. Like, I just hope you know how much work it will take you to get to the level of plumber where you could finally get that like huge income, because it's not like you show up day one and all of a sudden you're a plumber. You got to do this long apprentice like ship. You got to do all this stuff. And so to me, like any path you take, if it demands a high value where you're going to get paid for it, you got to put on some work, put in some work. You got to develop a skill. So to become a plumber takes time. To be like any job which is paying you what value you're providing to the company, like for instance, I love like fast food and I worked at fast foods before, but they're never going to pay you $50 an hour at fast foods. If somebody wrote a law says, if you have employees at a fast food company, you have to pay them $50. I guarantee you next week, and you already see it happening, they're just going to automate the process because it's cheaper, like, right? Because the value you provide, and it's just, I'm not saying like you work where you need to work, but the idea is like if you want to have a certain level of income, you have to be able to represent a skill that allows you to ask for that income to begin with. And so like if you don't go into coding, like what else are you going to do? And the work that will take to accomplish the same thing is going to be just as hard. So there's no easy way out. And to me, I think tech is nicer because of all those other things we mentioned. Is in my mind is that I could either work for a company or I could also try to build my own product or create a SaaS. I feel like learning to code gives you a superpower where you could build something from nothing that could potentially generate income.
100%. And it's so funny that you mentioned like those manual labor jobs, because everybody is like kind of joking like, oh, go learn to be a plumber and electrician. And it goes back to like supply and demand, right? Because everybody's telling you to be a coder when every company is hiring. Go ask someone who worked construction what it was like in 2008. Go ask anyone who worked construction what it was like when that fucking supply and demand dried up, and all those skeletons of buildings and houses that were in the middle of construction were just sitting there, and people were laid off and they couldn't find work, and people that were making 200 grand a year being a plumber were like doing under the table work so they can keep their unemployment and then go like unclog somebody's toilet, like it's the same thing right now that we're kind of experiencing with development in that sense, right? Like people are doing what they need to do in order to try to stay afloat and hopefully find the next job or figure out how they can make money if they gotten laid off as a developer. And now everybody's telling you to go be a plumber. But in a few years from now, if we have a big real estate market crash, it's going to go right back to the next cycle of like, oh, don't be a plumber because there's no work. You got to learn how to code because it's all these AI developers now are making all the money. So it's just like, it's weird. And it's funny because I feel like one of those, like, it's something you only know after you've been around for a little while. And it's so true when these like young 21-year-olds or 20-year-olds are like, oh, what do you mean it's going to take a year or 2 years to like learn how to code and get a job? Like, I want to learn in 3 months and I want to make $150,000 a year. I was like, shit, me too. I wanted to be able to do that too. And I realized that like I set realistic expectations when I was learning how to code. And I would set like the same ones now. I would probably set the same dollar amount. Like when I was learning how to code, I was like 50,000. I was like, that's the number. Like if I can make 50,000 at my first job, it's a real developer job, I'd be happy. If you tell most people that, and okay, 2017, 50,000 maybe stretched a little bit more because inflation wasn't there. But like that was what I was aiming for. But when I hear somebody say like, oh, I want to make 150,000, for what, bro? You don't even know HTML and CSS. Yeah. Like, how long do you think it's going to take you to like be good at that? And then like the market was good. And then you did start hearing some stories of people that were able to land 6-figure jobs as their first job. And then somebody who does this and then gets $40,000 a year feels like shit about themselves. And it's just like, well, no, like it's
a stepping stone.
It is. And then I eventually made the 150 a year. I eventually made the 6-figure salary, but I set realistic expectations. And I told myself, X amount of years, I know that I'll do one job for a few years and I'll move on to the next one. And hopefully by the 5-year mark, which was kind of like my arbitrary number that I gave myself, I will be over six figures, and I was. And then I see a lot of comments in some of my videos where I talked about my salary, where people were like, bro, with your experience, you should be making X amount of dollars. You should be
$1
making
billion.
250. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
just like,
shut up.
it's like, I want to see your pay stub, bro.
Yeah.
Like, how much are you making? Because if you can
Dude,
say that, then I want to see you do what I
the
did, right?
craziest thing what people don't understand, because they're all in the tech circle. If you like look in development stuff, you look in YouTube videos, you look on Twitter, you're in a small percentage of people that are developers who already, by being in that circle, the income bracket is so much higher. Like if you look up what's the average income of an average American, like here's the thing, like my sister told me, like God, like I love my sister, and I know like she didn't mean it in any negative way, but I think it did irk her a little bit, because like when I got to a point where I finally made it six figures, yes, she looked at me and she said, I have a college degree, I am going for my master's, and then I'm probably going to go to PhD. And here you are, college dropout, making six-figure income. And she meant it with love, but I could also tell, like, I'm like, look, it's just, it is what it is, in a sense that, it's a still high in demand skill that I think, there's still a lot of value. And the goal is, just to focus on being the best that you can be, and eventually the things will come. And one thing I want to say, like, in terms of jobs, like when we talk about plumbers, we talk about construction. I mean, I used to run a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. I loved it. And that was like the way I made my income. I think whatever role you feel you're going to enjoy, go full into it. Like if you want to be a plumber, be the best plumber they could be. If you want to be a mechanic, be the best mechanic you can be. You want to learn to code, do it because you enjoy it, right? And I know sometimes people say, no, I do certain jobs just because it has high income. But I think like if you don't enjoy it even a little bit, you'll never be able to sit through the hours that it takes to develop the skill and go through the learning journey and get there. And so there is no like wrong path, except like if you're doing something that you're not willing to be the best at and you don't enjoy a little bit. And I'll just quickly tell my story of my job experience. So, and I'll actually talk a little bit about why it's important to make connections with people, because they lead you to jobs much easier than doing resumes. And this is not fair, but I like will tell you that like I'm not gonna lie to you, tell you this is like, oh, I did something else, that's why I got my job. Like I have a big mouth, I love to talk. And so when I used to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I made a lot of friends. Like we had doctors, we had lawyers, we had so many different people there. And while I was learning to code, we had a woman in our class who ran a marketing agency. And she saw me one day working on my WordPress website. And it's like, oh, do you like know a little bit about coding and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh yeah, like, cause for this, like I've been learning PHP and whatever. She's like, well, I run this marketing agency. If you want to like, practice a little bit more, let me know. We have an internship. And I was like, you know what? I was actually thinking of switching into careers. Like that's actually going to be a good opportunity. Do you mind if I shadow somebody? And so through me knowing her and sharing my goals, saying like, hey, yeah, I want to be a developer, I got that first internship. And that internship left to like a unpaid internship, and then eventually they hired me as a contractor for like $25 an hour, which I was like so happy. I was like, oh my God, I'm living life, because I'm making like less money than I did at my business, but I'm doing it at this new thing that I'm learning, which is development. And then while doing PHP, like I loved it, but I was like, no, I really want to be the cool kid. So I was like, React is what all the cool thing like kids doing right now. So I started learning React, and at the time, like, I didn't know enough, like I sucked at it, but I kind of knew what React was. Another jiu-jitsu person in my school, he's like, Paul, like you do a little bit coding, like I know you do PHP, like, which I don't care for, but maybe you have some friends that do React. I'm like, it's funny that you say that, because I do have a friend that does React, and he's actually really good. And basically, I connected them two together. And my friend worked with this dude for a long time, like 3-4 years. But the reason why I tell you that story, while he's working with this friend, I'm still learning React. I'm still going on my journey. My friend Jeff, who I recommend to my friend, I moved to Texas, and I'm talking to him. I'm like, Jeff, man, I've been learning React. I think I'm ready to start applying. Do you know any positions out there that are open? And he's like, well, my company is not hiring, and I think like you're not quite ready to go to my company, but talk to my wife. I talk to his wife, and she's like, yeah, I work for this company. You know what? I'll tell him that I have a friend who's looking for a React position. Just give me your resume. So basically, what I'm getting at, all my jobs were like through some sort of referral. And I know it's unfair, but if you practice finding friends, and you could do it through meetups, stuff like that, it is the best way to find these opportunities. But anyway, she went to her boss and says, I have this friend. He's, great React developer. Can't he do an interview? And the guy's like, you know what? Like, have him come in on Monday. I came in. Obviously, like, you have to kind of pass the interview. And so I passed the interview, got my job. That was my real first development job, was working for this company, VersaSuite. If you had to guess how much they were going to pay me, you will never guess because it's so low. And the only reason I took it is because I didn't care. I was single, so I didn't have like, and my daughter, she's already like out of the house because I had her like really young. So I didn't have real responsibilities. I'm not saying people should go that low ever. But my first developer job was making $13.75 an hour. So guess what I had to do? I had to work a second job at the HEB supermarket where I got paid $13.75 an hour as well as a personal shopper, just to make my bills. I don't know why I stayed there for a year and a half, but after a year and a half, I was like, you know what? I got to find another opportunity. I'm kind of like, get React. I'm learning, like all these cool things. I have a year and a half experience. And then my friend Jeff, who I introduced to this guy a long time ago, he's like, hey, David, the guy that you know from jiu-jitsu, they're looking to expand the product and they're looking for a React developer. So I told him, you've been learning React and you actually know React, so I'm actually going to refer you back to him. So David actually calls me. He's like, Paul, I heard that she became a developer. I'm like, yeah. He's like, why don't you come work for my company? And so I got that job. So I went from $13.75 an hour to making $85,000 a year, which was sick. So to me, even like the year and a half of complete hell working at my first company, like the fruits of your labor and experience, they pay off. Because then my second job was 80,000. And what school, like I worked there, it was like really fun. And then I got a interesting opportunity for Strappy. And the way I got hired to Strappy is also a ridiculous story. So this is so crazy because I'm probably the luckiest person in the world. There's part that I'm not sharing because I think everybody should know that luck means like preparation and timing. And it's not like, I'm sure some people are lucky, but you need to have the experience to take advantage of that luck. So, but people watching on YouTube, you could just think I'm lucky and I don't deserve any of the things that I got. But so I started learning, React, and I used to take these courses on Udemy. And there's this guy called John Smilga. He has a channel called Coding Addict. He's one of the best Udemy instructors. And I started taking his courses. And through taking his courses, sometimes I would have like an issue. So I would ask him a question. And I would talk to him. And, he's like, I was like, oh, wow. He like responds like, just what a cool dude. But like, whatever. That made nothing of it. And then what I started to do when I started doing my YouTube channel, I started just being like, hey, like through my learning journey, like some of the best courses I took was from this guy, John Smilga. I didn't even know who he was at this point outside of my interaction on like just a question on his course. And then one day out of the blue, I was like, man, John Smilga helped me so much on my learning journey. Wouldn't it be cool if I like interview him on my channel? And I just out of the blue reached out to him. And I was like, hey, like I have this YouTube channel. I'm this brand new at coding. Like your courses really, really helped me a lot. Actually, my first job that I got was thanks to your course. And he's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And he's like, I actually saw your channel. I think it's like really cool because you're being very authentic with your learning journey. And so we started this friendship. And I always recommend his courses. Always like, so I didn't go to him like, my name is Paul. This is what I want you to do for me. Instead, I went to him like just talk about him all the time to a point where he found out me talking about him through seeing me talk about him. So like the idea is like, don't expect stuff from people when you're networking by being like, for instance, like me going to you and being like, hey, like go ahead and like I want to plug my course on your channel. Like they'll be stupid, like, right? Especially if you didn't have a relationship. And I don't have a course, by the way, if people are wondering. So like you always have to give, and then people will notice you. So that kind of like indirect relationship with John Smilga led to us actually finally doing this little podcast where we became more friends, and we started doing this monthly podcast eventually called like the the Web Dev Power Hour, which was fun. And one day, because I would always talk about Strappy, and he would be like, Paul, you talk about Strappy so much, it's like, have you ever considered like actually applying to the company? I was like, no, I never thought about it. Just never crossed my mind. And one day, this was interesting because John, he knew how much I love Strappy. So to surprise me, he invited their developer advocate to our podcast, which I didn't know. And I just got into this like nerd conversation with the dude about Strappy. And at the end, I go like, listen, now that I know you, jokingly, I said to him, now that I know you, I'm going to send my resume to the company and I'm going to say you're my referral. And that's kind of what happened. I sent my resume, and Daniel, good dude, he was like, oh yeah, Paul. And so the point is, you get your opportunities not by blindly sending a resume. I'm not saying it doesn't work. You're just going to have to send a lot of them, but it comes through providing value to others and building relationships. And, and so now I work at Strappy because of this long relationship building process. And I also had to pass the interview. They had like 7-step interview, by the way. So like there is stuff on you. But the one thing that I was going to say is when people hear like I'll use you as an example. So when you started your YouTube channel, like I think you had like, when I first started watching, you had 12,000 subscribers. And I would just watch you like work hard, putting out videos, doing all this work and still not getting the same views and where you are today. And just through consistency, through sheer like insanity work and what it took to get your channel to where it is today, someone could see you and be like, who the fuck is this? Sorry, who's the fuck is this guy Dorian? And why does anybody watch him? Why does he have this huge channel? Blah, 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 blah. And it's because he put in the work. But sometimes people just see the end result and they just think he's lucky. The algorithm loves him. Like, or this, that, and they don't get the work that it took. And I'm finding myself kind of starting to fall into that position as well. And that's why I kind of like the fact that I have my old videos on my YouTube channel where like I'm a complete idiot and don't know what I'm talking about, don't even have a tech job, to kind of remind people like this is where I came from. So like people that watched me through my struggle, the whole journey, they're like, yeah, we get it. We know why Paul got hired. We know the work and the sacrifice he had to do. But if someone new comes into my channel, he's like, look at this dude. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Like he's a simp for Strappy. Like, and I'm just like, you know what? It's like, because people don't see the journey to see the final result. And sometimes that kind of gives people the wrong feeling of like, oh, if they're there, it must have been easy for them because they missed the journey. And that's just not the case.
No, yeah, it's that old saying, right? Behind every overnight success, there's like 10 years of hard work that nobody sees.
Right. And
it's funny because you like, man, you touched on so many good points with like networking, a little bit about like the value of social media and not necessarily building social media just for the sake of wanting to grow it. I'm not gonna lie, like there was a big part of me that wanted to grow a channel, and that's also, but my output showed that I was serious about trying to do that, where, the same way that some people want to learn how to code in 3 months, or some people that want to upload 2 YouTube videos and be Mr. Beast, like that's never going to happen, right? Like you gotta put in the work. And there's so much value in networking that like a lot of my early opportunities came from networking. And it's funny because when I mention it, I've seen so many comments where it's like, oh, I clicked off of the video when you said go network. And like, I've seen people like shit on it in Reddit where everybody's like, oh, they say go network. Like, I want to learn off of my skills. Like the truth is that that's not how the world works. And there's so much value in networking, and most people will recommend you if they like you personally. And honestly, sometimes, as much as people don't want to hear this, sometimes personality is a little bit more important than skill. Not always, but if 2 people are exactly the same skill-wise and one person just seems like they're going to be a little bit better to work with than the other person,
team player.
Who do you think is going to get hired? The guy that looks like an asshole, or the guy that seems to have like a good personality that you feel will go well with your team.
Yeah.
Obviously, the person that you feel that's going to fit in the best. And like, then people are going to be like, well, I'm like this kind of person or that kind of person. Like,
So
I get it. I don't like networking. I don't like doing that stuff, but it's kind of a game that you have to play. And the truth is that when I end up doing it, I really enjoy it. And like a lot of my early opportunities all came from me going to meetups and networking with people. And like you said, I never asked for anything, but my first meetup, I got a invitation to apply where I was completely underqualified and failed their screening test, which was a few little basic like algorithm tests because I was brand new. But then by like my third month of attending this meetup, right around the same time that I ended up getting hired, like I had an interview lined up just from like going, and the guy that ran the meetup got used to me and like saw me all the time, and we established a friendship, and his company started hiring, and he got me an interview in there. And also the recruiter that I met them at a React meetup in Vegas, which led me to getting my first job. And that all came through networking. And but it's that luck thing, right? Where people will be like, "Oh, you got lucky because you met that recruiter there." No, bro, I was going to those meetups regardless of who was
yes,
there. I was
yeah,
just trying to like get around people that could like just be the people I wanted to be, right? Like I wanted to be around
exactly.
the developers because I wanted to become a developer, and I wanted to understand what they were doing, and I wanted to see like what do these guys talk about, and like what can I learn from them rather than like being like what can I get from them. Like I always
Exactly.
went in there open mind, closed mouth until I had like a question that actually felt like it made sense. And a lot of the times I was like a fly on the wall until I eventually became familiar with everyone and joined in on conversations. And like I don't know, people expect everything to, and I feel like a boomer and an old man, like, oh, these young people expect everything to be easy. But it's there's some truth to, and not just an age thing. There's just a lot of people that have this mentality that things are just going to be handed to you, and anyone who is successful got there by luck. Like, no, dude, I worked so
Yeah.
hard learning how to code. I spent so many hours like waking up, getting on my laptop, falling asleep with my laptop on my lap, being on my computer 16 hours a day. Like, I stopped visiting friends. I stopped going to jujitsu. I stopped going to the gym. I stopped doing everything. All I did was code. And then eventually I got a job. And then people will be like, oh, it's because you learned in 2017.
They
Oh,
always
it's
have an
because,
excuse.
yeah. There's always some reason to like discredit hard work because, again, like you said, people see like the big event. People see like the big outcome, and they don't see all the grind and the effort that's put behind it that led up to that.
The crazy thing when I tell the story about networking, I tell it because I want to keep it short and concise. I'll just tell about the successful jobs I got, and they're like, "Oh, they hired you because they knew you." I'm like, "Bro, I didn't tell you about the networking connections that I made where I went in an interview and completely flunked and failed and didn't get hired. It's just just going to be like a long story because then I have to tell about all my failed attempts. But it is it's to me it's just I find that. And I want, like, you probably similar to that. When I started coding, I literally like said to myself, I'm going to try this thing until I get hired. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to kind of try it. I'm either going to like fail flat on my face. If I have to work two jobs, which I did, I will. If I have to, like, whatever I have to do, I'm going to do it. And that's it. Just be stubborn with it. And this is why I'm here. And I always tell people, I think the reason why I got hired is because I just never quit. Like, I just kept trying, and that it took me 4 years. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, most people, they accomplish the same goal I did way quicker. For those of you watching, but at the end of the day, it's like, how bad do you want it, and how much work are you willing to do? Like a lot of people, like I get comments on my YouTube channel, bro, your YouTube channel, like, and I appreciate all of them, by the way, if you're watching, like, and you left that comment, but like, bro, your channel is so underappreciated. You need more subs. And I'm like, thank you. I appreciate like your awesome comment, but I'm not doing the work that's going to lead to the type of YouTube channel growth that I want, because YouTube is not easy, and YouTube takes a lot of work. And so to me, like, I'm not gonna take that comment and be like, you know what, you're right. I should have more fucking viewers. I should like do this and that. No, I'm like responsible enough to say like, Paul, you don't do enough work to get the benefits of growing your channel because you're just not doing the bare minimum, if anything. And to me, like, I think being aware, I think like the biggest thing is not being delusional in your expectation, and you're not owed anything. No one owes you like the job. No one owes you, like, you have to get it yourself, and you have to be realistic with yourself to kind of say to yourself, yeah, I'm not qualified. Like, I'll tell you a quick story. So I thought I wasn't getting hired. And I'm not saying ageism is not a thing. I think it is. Legally, you're not allowed to do that. But at the same time, some companies, they'll just say, oh, like, we decided to go with another candidate. But for the longest time, I thought when I was going for jobs that it was because I was older. It was because I was old, and that's it. And they were just going with younger folks. And I realized it wasn't that because I was older, is that I wasn't actually qualified for the job. I didn't know the tech well enough to be able to do the work that they expect from me. And once I was qualified for the job, I got hired. And I think that's what a lot of people, younger people maybe, like, get, is that they feel like just because they tried, that automatically puts them like, then I should probably get it. No, that's not how life works. It's, it's hard.
No, 100%. I think that some of us, like you and it might just be a personality thing. I don't know. You mentioned you have like ADHD, and I'm starting to think that I'm pretty self-diagnosed at this point. I haven't made it official, but man, there I check off a lot of those marks, and I think that there's a certain level of and maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's an upbringing thing, but like I'm extra hard on myself, and like I don't aim for perfection, but I aim for like striving for perfection, right? Like I want to put in the reps, like, and maybe it's a jujitsu thing. Maybe it's training martial arts where I know, like, I went to jujitsu and I didn't know anything, and I was getting my ass kicked, and it hurt my lungs because I had no cardio. And I showed up the next day, and I showed up the next day, and then pretty soon a couple months went by, then 6 months, then a year later I have my blue belt. Then all of a sudden, like, something that I felt like I would never be good at became something that I don't think I'm good at it anyways still, right? And it's a long journey, but I never put myself in a I want to do this by X amount of time. When you go into jiu-jitsu, they tell you it takes 10 years to get a black belt.
That's
Like
insane.
like the minute that you wrap your head around that and you're like, all right, well, I'm in it for the long haul. Like, it's going to be 10 years before I'm even like considered a black belt. Like, and that's like quote unquote average, right? Some people it takes 15 years, right? Like right now I'm over 10 years and I'm still a purple belt because life happens. But I said I'm going to do this because I like it, because I want to do it, I want to get good at it, and I'm going to just keep going. And that was the same mindset, like you said, like when I went to get a job, or when I went to learn how to code because I wanted to get a job, I told myself, I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm hoping to do it in a year, but I'm just going to keep going until somebody hires me. And I remember having those talks with my wife and just feeling like, I don't know, like, man, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. It feels like I'm not understanding stuff. And I started feeling like I should throw in the towel, and just saying, I remember the conversation, like, I'm just going to, like, somebody's gonna hire me. Like, somebody's gonna have to be like, this guy is good enough to do the job. And eventually that happened. But man, it was a lot of hard work, and it was really, really hard. And I just told myself I'm not gonna quit until I make it happen. The same mindset with YouTube is like the same. I'm learning now to apply that mindset with other things, because it has to be like the winner's mindset. And I'm not saying like I'm a winner, but like, if you listen to people who have accomplished things, and you don't just look at the big event when they sold their company for millions of dollars, or when whatever, they win in a big award or something, like, when you hear them talk, it's the reps at the gym, it's the failures, it's the injuries, it's the hard time, it's the wanting to quit but not quitting, and it's the going when you don't feel like showing up, and all of those things over time, they compound, and then one day, boom, it happens. And it's just like, oh man, it took me 10 years to get here. Wow, I finally made it. And I don't know, it's interesting too, especially like when you're older. And one of the questions that I had written down, and it's funny that you mentioned it, about like being older and getting into this, like, it's hard because many of us, especially when we start at an older age, we've kind of like our path has been determined already, right? Like we're kind of like when I learned how to code, I was 32, right? At this point, I didn't really have a career, but like I was just gonna be a waiter and a valet attendant for the rest of my life because that's what I did, right? I didn't have anything else, and like having to make that shift and say like I'm gonna go do this at an older age. I already had one kid and another one on the way, and I had a mortgage and like responsibilities that it was very hard for me to to commit to so much time and energy and effort into learning. And as someone who also learned, I think you were older than I was when you got your first job, what's like advice that you would give people who are 30 plus or even 40 plus that are like trying to learn how to code and get into it that we haven't already like discussed, I guess?
Yeah, it's such a hard thing because everybody's so different. So it's hard to give general advice. So we did say if this is something you enjoy, it's still like a good career choice. And if you become technical literate, maybe even if you don't get a job as a developer, there the pie is big enough that there's other technical roles. Maybe you're not a developer per se, but you're solution engineer, you're whatever product this, or you're like, so like, I think it's still a smart choice to do. But with that being said, like you talked about your learning journey, like you had your wife, you had your first kid on the way, you had your second kid on the way, you have the mortgage. This is not an easy shift. So if you're in a position that like Dorian was in, like you need to take that into consideration, talk to your spouse, like your family, and explain to her, hey, this is the change I want to make. Nothing's guaranteed in life, but this is the commitment that will require me to learn these things. And I just need to have your support and understand that you agree with me making a decision. So if you have a family, it's not the decision you make by yourself. It's the decision you make with your partner, like your wife. It's very important because you have a lot riding. Like you have your kids, your like the livelihood of their, like, so you can't make a rash decision. So I'm not saying it's impossible to make decision and do it. Obviously people are doing it, but you do have to take that into consideration. Like so that's one thing I would point out that we didn't talk about. The second thing, like in my case, my daughter was already older. She was already out of the house. Like she actually just recently, like at the time she's 23 now. So at the time she was like 18, she just went into the Navy. So she was already doing her thing. And I was single. So I didn't have the big responsibility, and I took it as a privilege. Like, hey, you don't have that many responsibilities. Just put in as much time as you can to coding. But then like what I didn't realize, because a lot of times people don't talk about is I met a girl, we started dating, then she became my fiance. And I talked to her about like the aspect of like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Are you okay of me like working, then coming home and studying and not being able to give enough time to our relationship? Like I still like want to be with you, but you just have to understand that for me to get hired, I need to put in this massive effort up front. And also other reasons also, but that journey was hard for her because she wanted to be with someone who was already situated in their life. And that's just the reality. And so you do need to take those things into consideration. So if you do have a family and a partner, make sure that you're both in agreement. And if you're just dating someone, like whatever, just always be upfront with the responsibility that it takes outside of like. And the third thing I would say, if you're older, because this is another case, I talked to a gentleman, he was making already 6 figures, like in a managerial role, but he just liked coding for fun. And he goes to me like, Paul, I really want to switch careers. What is it like? And I told him the truth. I'm like, look, it's going to take a long time to learn. And you're already making over 6 figures. You're probably not going to get started with a job that's making 6 figures. You might start, because a lot of times people think FANG, but there's a lot of developer jobs where they do pay like 65, 70, like whatever, which are much reasonable to get. But you're not going to be where you were, and you just have to be okay with it. And then it might take 2-3 years. You will eventually get to that 6-figure income, but it takes time, it takes work. And I said to you, are you like, you have a family, you already have a decent job. What the journey I described, are you willing to pay the price? Like, and he's like, you know what? I really appreciate your honesty, Paul. And no, I'm not ready to pay that price because I'm already making 6 figures. I know where I'm at. My family's happy. We have health insurance. Our kids are going to school. I know I'll be able to do this. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And so those are the big caveats, like take into, because if you're older, like it's going to take a massive effort and a lot of work. And if you're married with family and kids, make sure you talk to your family about it. Make sure that you're all on board together. And if you have a very supportive spouse, like that'll be really awesome. And just take them into account. And the second thing, if you already have a nice fancy job, I talked to multiple people. I talked to another guy who was in sales. He was making $200,000 a year. I'm like, man, I want your job. What are you asking me about coding? I want to know how, like, high ticket sales items. Come on, let me know the secrets. And he was like, yeah, Paul, I think you're right. I think I'm just going to stick with my job because I'm making like really good money living life. I'm like, yeah, like it's like, so you definitely have to take those caveats. But if you enjoy it, it's just a matter of putting in the work and doing it. But you do have to have that realistic view and expectations.
Yeah, I think those were all very valid points. And I do remember how stressful it was for our relationship too, especially that we had a kid and like it was early newborn phase and my wife was pregnant and like, there was a lot of hard nights. Luckily my daughter was still young enough to where like, I have pictures of her like asleep on me and me on my laptop like this, like just the amount of effort and how much strain and having my wife who was on board, like, dude, she's such a trooper. She's always got my back. And even with YouTube and like what we're doing now with the traveling, she always said like, no, you got this, and that was super helpful. And a YouTube thing, I think I told you when we talked on your channel where she was like, even when your videos suck, or when she says, even when I thought your videos sucked, I knew that you were going to make it. And I was like, oh, thanks, and that's just how she's a ball buster, but that's how she is. And I think the pay cut thing is something that a lot of people who are already established, which usually affects older people, because if you're over 30, if you're in your 40s, there's a good chance that if you did things right and you weren't like me and Paul, who were a little bit maybe not
untraditional.
Untraditional to put for a lack of better words, like maybe you took a good route, you went to college, you landed a good job, and you've worked your way up the corporate ladder and you're making good money. Like you hear developers make six figures, but yeah, it's usually not your first job and it's going to take a little while for you to get to that point. So it is hard to make that transition for some people who are in a position where, financially and relationship wise and life wise, like life is too in the way for them to actually make the change. And it sucks. And I'm going through that right now just with the entrepreneurial stuff that I'm doing, because it's the same thing. I'm like going to take a huge pay cut to try to become a full-time YouTuber and indie hacker. Mind you, I don't make a lot of money on YouTube, and I also don't have any SaaS products yet, but I'm going to try to make it happen. But we've taken all of that into consideration, and I guess you'd have to do the same if you're learning how to code and you're older when it comes to taking a pay cut. I do want to ask some more questions, but man, I feel like we covered a ton of them. So I was like the DevRel stuff, we talked about Strappy. So this is one, right? And I think, God, we kind of talked about that too, because we talked about your favorite tech stack, and the question was going to be like, I always see you building in new technologies. It was like, how do you have so much time to do that? And then having tested out so many frameworks, what's your favorite tech stack right now? But I think it's like Remix and Strappy, right? Like that's where you're at with that.
So I'm like either Next.js and Strappy. Like at work, that's what I make a lot of content around. And then for all my personal projects, I'm using Remix and Strappy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's just like,
and I was just one thing I want to add.
I feel like I've asked you most of this stuff.
Yeah. I did want to add something, and this is something.
Sorry, it cut out a little bit there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I wanted to coming back to the tech stack. You did mention Mern, and I was gonna say like Mern is good, but I think doing like a Postgres database would be smarter for new developers. But
I
forgot to say that.
So the only reason it's so funny, because I go SQL relational.
Yeah.
If I'm building something, having worked in what was it, MySQL, not MySQL, it was whichever one, the Microsoft. God, I feel like I've been hit in the head today. I can't think of the it was just
whatever
SQL
whatever
that we used
fine.
At my previous job, and I came from AEM, which uses kind of like it's a NoSQL, but more like a folder structure database. It's weird. It's a Java content repository. It's called the JCR, which is the closest thing would be something that's like NoSQL, but it's more like file based. It's kind of confusing and hard to explain, but I always had recommended NoSQL people like MongoDB or something for the MERN stack. And having built stuff out and understanding how powerful relational databases can be, and when you start building more complex stuff, how much value it can bring you when you really get in the weeds of having to need relationships between stuff, that I couldn't see myself ever using NoSQL unless it's something
Yep.
super simple. Because the minute it gets a little complex and I want something to have a relationship, I feel like it takes a lot of work to have like those weird pseudo relationships that you can do with like a NoSQL type database, to where like I would just rather do like Postgres or anything
Yeah.
that's relational,
For me,
whatever it is. Yeah.
it's coming from like a pain point of struggling my first 3 months at my job and being like, I'm gonna get fired for sure. Is because when I was doing tutorials, everybody's like, just use Firebase, use Mongo, use Firebase, use Mongo. Every job I worked at, nobody uses Firebase, nobody uses Mongo. So if you're just starting out as a brand new developer, just start with Postgres, like SQL database, because that's most likely what you're going to use at your job. And so that's like the only caveat, because I remember sweating and crying every day. I would go home and being like, I need to learn the SQL stuff ASAP. It was hilarious.
You know what I would say is that, because learning SQL as a new developer or someone who's just learning how to code, like the syntax, like I don't really like it too much. Like having to actually write like raw SQL is just like, eh. I think that understanding a lot of like how relationships work and understanding like one-to-ones, many-to-manys, one-to-many, stuff like that, and like what that all means is
Yeah.
super valuable. And then if you use like an ORM, or if you use like a client library like Supabase that is using Postgres under the hood, but they have their own,
Yeah.
JavaScript syntax that lets you select your stuff or make your updates and stuff with their own syntax that's using JavaScript, but understanding like what's going on under the hood with those relationships, and how like foreign key and primary key relationships work and things like that. I think that's where like a lot of the value comes in, because I don't ever find myself writing like raw
Yeah.
SQL at all. Even at my job, when it was like
Yeah.
Java and Spring Boot, we used like a lot of like Spring entities and stuff like that, which was, just part of the framework. But understanding those relationships was really how you had to map out your database and understand how to structure like your data structures needed to be. And I think that's where the value of learning SQL really comes in.
Yeah, and that's a good clarification. When I meant like learn SQL, I meant like use an ORM, to communicate with the database. So like I typically, like if I was doing not using Strapi, because Strapi uses SQL under the hood, and you get all that magic, but you don't have to worry too much about it. But if I was not using Strapi, I would use like Prisma, regardless if it's Next.js or Remix, and I would use Prisma to communicate to like a Postgres database.
I've heard a lot of good things about Prisma. I've also heard a lot of people talk about Drizzle, but it's crazy because there's so many frameworks
Yeah.
and so many tools that we have out there, and there's always like a new one that comes up. And then when you're new, like, man, I've been going through a lot of like new guy stuff, because these are all things that are new to me, because I've just never used these tools. And then I go down these rabbit holes of like, should I use Prisma or should I use Drizzle? And then it's like, you go to the Prisma people and it's like, they say all the bad things about
Yeah.
Drizzle. And then you go to the Drizzle people and they say all the bad things about Prisma. And then it's just like, now I know all the bad things about each and I still can't make a decision. And it feels like that with almost every bit of like building out with, I don't want to say Next.js, but just like these serverless front end full stack frameworks. And it's kind of why, I'm not going to lie, it's kind of why Laravel is feeling more and more appealing to me, because I feel like I don't have to make those decisions.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of them are kind of made for me. It's opinionated in the sense of like how things need to be done. It's got like a classic model view controller setup, which is kind of something that I'm used to. And then it's like, well, how do you, query the database? database, or how do you do this many to many relationship? Oh, well, it's just part of their ORM that's baked in. I don't have to go and pick an ORM. It's already using what is it, Eloquent, or I'm very new to it, but I'm learning about this stuff now. I'm just like, oh, well, cool. I don't even have to go figure out which one I should use. It's already telling me which one I should use, and I really am finding myself liking that, because I get into decision paralysis and I want to find the best solution. And there's never a best solution. It's usually the one that you choose to go with, and everything's going to have its pros and cons. And I think that it's hard to get over that sometimes, where it's with some of these front end full stack frameworks, it's kind of like you build your own, like, it's kind of build your own adventure. Where like I feel like something like Laravel is like, no, it's you got these Legos, and here's the directions on how exactly to build this thing that's on the picture. And with these other ones where you kind of build your own adventure, you end up taking all the Legos and you throw away the instructions and you start piecing stuff together and then Googling like how it's supposed to look. I guess.
No, that makes total sense. And I think like even the advice like I give like about like, oh no, use this, use that. I think like the most, like if I was to simplify my advice, anybody who's learning, pick one path and stick to it until you get a job. So if that path is PHP and with like Laravel, you're going to get hired. If it's ASP.NET, stick with that, you're going to get hired. If it's Java with Java, whatever, just, I don't know anything about Java, you're probably going to get hired. It's perfectly fine. You know what I mean? It's the issue comes, and this is the mistake I made at the beginning. I tried to learn everything, and then I was just not good enough at everything, so just pick a path.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect way of putting it, because I do tell a lot of people that, and I feel like a lot of beginners will do that. I see a lot of the comments on some of my learning the code videos where it's like, oh, should I learn Python and Django? Should I learn this and that? Should I learn this? And it's like, just pick one and just do it. At the end of the day, you're building a CRUD app. At the end of the day, you got a back end and a front end. At the end of the day, you're going to have to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It doesn't matter if you learn Vue, if you learn React, if you learn Angular. It doesn't really matter, as long as you kind of stick with something and understand it well enough to be able to like be marketable to an employer that uses those tools and technology. Of course, the best answer is, well, go look on LinkedIn and go look in your area or in the area that you plan to like try to look for jobs and see what they're looking for, and then see what stack comes up the most, and then maybe go and learn that. And like, while that's all really good information, at the same time, I think it comes back down to what you said. Just pick something and stick with it. Eventually, somebody's going to need something done in that, and you can be the person that does it, right? Like, that's just it. I think we put too much thought into all of like the process and forget that it's just doing it that counts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Paul, it's been 2 hours. I want to be considerate of your time. It goes by really quick when we're like talking it up, and I have a lot of fun with these conversations. And these are, I think, our first call that we did almost went for like 3 hours. We live streamed it on my channel way back when, and our last one that we had was, I think, about 2 hours on your channel, and we're hitting that 2 hour mark. So I do want to, give you the rest of your Saturday back, although I don't know if it'll be Saturday when I release this, but I want to say thank you and give you an opportunity to like shout out your channel, Coding After 30, or anything else that you might want people to check out, like other socials or stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really big on social. I do have a Twitter, Coding 30, but definitely check out my channel, Coding After 30, and then I'll do a shameless plug for Strappy because it's amazing. I was gonna say, every project has different requirements, but give it a try. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I will help you with that. But the most important, thank you to you, Dorian, giving me this opportunity to come chat with you. It's been amazing seeing your journey on YouTube, and more to come. And I always look forward to your posts on Twitter because sometimes I laugh so hard.
I'm gonna get canceled on it one day. No lie. I thought it almost happened the other day. I honestly should just stop posting on
I
there
think so.
if
To
I'm
be
being
honest,
honest.
like I find them funny, but at the same time, I'm like for your own safety.
Honestly, for my mental health, I start getting, I don't know. Twitter has become fun. It's something I never paid attention to, and lately I've been posting on it more and scrolling on it more than I care to admit. And maybe I should just take a break for my health. This stupid reaction thing
Yeah,
on
yeah.
my
I don't know
computer
who came up with that idea. That's
I
so
don't know. It
dumb.
was a you know for sure that there was a bunch of meetings and it was some executives
Yeah.
like kid that was interning that thought it was a good idea, and they and they said, yeah, we're gonna add that, and somebody worked on that probably for like 6 months.
That's got to be like awkward though, like because like you just like because you like to sit like this, like and it kind of thinks like it's a
Yeah, that's what keeps setting it
yeah,
off.
it the thumbs up like imagines like you're getting bad news. It's like something terrible happening. You're just like crying and you're sitting like this. A bunch of thumbs up come on the screen. You're like they didn't think
No,
about it. They
man.
didn't think about it. You know.
That's great. I was on stream and it came up and I was like, oh, somebody gave me a thumbs up. And then like I had no idea that it's like a reaction and you have to turn it off every time, which is super annoying. I need to find a way to disable it completely. But nonetheless, thanks again, man. I do enjoy talking with you and I appreciate you taking the time to come on and chit chatting. And I look forward to having another one of these calls sometime.
Awesome. Anytime. Thank you so much, Torian.
Yeah, thank you.